Thank you so much. Before I begin, I want to thank all of you for coming on such a beautiful day when everybody is outside enjoying wonderful weather, which is rare. I have connections with Canada. I was a visiting scholar at Osgood School of Law for a semester. And at that time, I also helped found a Canadian organization, Just Peace Advocates, that deals with issues of justice and peace. It's still very active. And I would urge you all, if you're interested in this issue, to also look at their website and maybe participate in their activities. They are a very activist organization. They try to organize specific activities around Israel, Palestine. The subject, the title that was presented to me is really very provocative because I have been a strong believer in nonviolence for a long, long time. In an area of the world that is known for its violence. And I don't need to tell this audience that the events of October 7 were not the beginning of the conflict in that part of the world. They had a major impact. They are continuing to have a major impact on what's happening there, and specifically on the issue of violence and the use of violence and whether violence can provide an answer either for the Palestinians or for the Israelis to provide them with the security that they want and with the freedom that they need and deserve. A few people understand that the Palestinians have been trying very hard to use nonviolent means. Some of you may know about the BDS movement, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, which are a method to try and bring nonviolent pressure to bear on the situation of the Palestinians by involving other parties and urging them to boycott and to divest from corporations and policies that perpetuate the conflict. And sanctions, bring sanctions against those who violate particularly international law. Not only that, but even prior to October 7, people in Gaza have tried a major nonviolent campaign called the Great March of Return, where they tried to nonviolently, without any weapons, march towards the border, calling for an end to the stifling siege that was making their life very difficult and very miserable. And unfortunately, they were met with very calculated violence in the form of snipers that would shoot anybody who gets anywhere near the fence. 62 people were killed in a single day. And the Israelis announced, we know where every bullet went. There was a deliberate, systematic policy to kill or to maim. And the two are different. In fact, we know because of reports in the Israeli Hebrew press that at one point they decided to start shooting at journalists and at medics. And each bullet would reach like 1 inch below the bulletproof vests that they were wearing and then explode inside their bodies to kill them. So we have medical people and journalists who were also assassinated by sniper bullets. Not only that, but the state of Israel created around the Gaza Strip a system of automated machine guns. The system was labeled Ro'eh Yoreh, to see, to shoot. These machine guns would automatically, without human intervention, shoot at anything that moved within the close proximity area. It depends, it changes from time to time, of about 1 kilometer inside the border of Gaza. Let me see if we can have the other map to concentrate on what's happening in Gaza. This is the Gaza Strip, and perhaps the most significant thing about this map, believe it or not, is the scale. The scale from here to here is 15 kilometers. I don't know if you calculate here in kilometers or in miles. In miles, the Gaza Strip is about 22 miles long and between 5 and 8 miles wide. It is home to 2.3 million human beings. 2/3 of them are refugees who lost their homes when the State of Israel was created. Half of them are minors and children. 60,000 of them are pregnant currently, about to give birth or have just given birth since the events of October 7 started. This area was so thoroughly and completely choked by Israel, which controlled not only all the borders except for the southern border, which was also controlled in cooperation with the Egyptian government, and the sea, of course, and the sky, which was continuously monitored by not only satellites and huge balloons and aircraft, but also by these drones that would buzz continuously, and you never know when they would drop bombs. In fact, Israel had so successfully, they thought, controlled Gaza through military force that it was no longer a problem for them. It was not an issue in Israeli politics, not an issue in their elections, not an issue in any of the sometimes very robust discussions that take place in Israel, because they felt that they had achieved a level of deterrence through military force. What happened on October 7 is really very curious, and perhaps it is worthwhile reminding people of what actually happened, because what actually happened and the papers have reported are two entirely different things. What happened on that day is that utter surprise of the Israeli military establishment, Hamas underwent a major military operation where this wall, that was the latest in high technology, as I said, that was operating above ground, on the ground, and below ground with sensors, very high tech, was breached in 30 different places simultaneously. And Palestinian forces breached that wall, attacked and captured 3 Israeli army bases, killing over 300 soldiers by Israeli counts. I'm only using Israeli accounts. And then also attacked some civilian groupings, some kibbutzim, as well as a music festival that was taking place within 2 kilometers, actually, of the border. Now, I want to make it clear, as an international lawyer and as an international human rights activist, that any taking of civilian hostages or targeting of civilians is wrong, illegal, and possibly a war crime. There's no mistake about that. A lot of the people who were actually captured and taken into Gaza were soldiers, about 45 soldiers. But another almost 100 civilians were taken, including women and children and elderly people who are clearly civilians, and that is a violation of international law. Make no mistake about it. In Israel, however, the shock of military defeat, basically, the utter destruction of their military doctrine, was such that the army, never mind the regular population, felt the need to retaliate massively. And I mean massively, because they wanted to restore deterrence, in their words. They wanted to make sure that never again will Hamas or the Palestinians ever dream of a military operation like this one. Where that campaign by Israel is going to end, we don't know yet. In fact, there are some indications it may not end. This may be a rolling, continuing operation for the foreseeable future. What is clear, however, is that at the end of that campaign, even if they manage to destroy and kill each and every last Hamas fighter, and I insist on talking about the fighters and the combatants and those who are in the tunnels as part of this military structure, even if Israel succeeds in that goal, which seems unlikely, after 5 months of really massively bombarding that area, even if they do, Israel is weaker and less secure today than it was before October 7th. Violence and military power alone cannot and has not and will not provide Israel with the security it needs. A political solution is required that removes the basis of hostility between the two groups. So at one level, maybe what happened on October 7th, for all the massive, massive human cost, the utter destruction that was rained upon the Palestinian people, mostly upon the civilians, actually. The physical destruction of all aspects of society, because Israeli targeting was on anything and everything that's remotely connected with Hamas. Now, Hamas, in addition to its military functions, was also a government. They had street sweepers, they had clerks, they had registration departments, they had traffic people, they carried out the functions of a government. So Israel took a policy of demonizing Hamas and claiming that anything that's closely related to Hamas is a legitimate object. So the distinction between combatants and non-combatants was almost instantly removed. And Israel announced that there will be no restrictions. Furthermore, they passed the lie that Hamas is hiding behind Palestinians as human shields. They claimed that the Shifa hospital was actually the headquarters under which the command and control center for Hamas existed. No proof, no evidence. But that legitimized bombing Al Shifa hospital and eventually ordering its evacuation. And when they evacuated it and went in, they did not find a command and control center at all. But having passed that particular lie, they were able to go after all the hospitals in Gaza. All 36 hospitals in Gaza have each been bombed, surrounded, attacked, and or forcibly evacuated, including Al-Nasr Hospital, let me see, which is around here near Jabalia, where they forcibly evacuated the hospital. And after they evacuated it and looked and, of course, didn't find anything, some other people came in and found that they had left babies in incubators who died in the hospital. Because hospitals are highly technical places. You can't just pick them up and force people to leave. There are sick and there are wounded and there are babies in incubators and there are very vulnerable populations. But then Israel said, Hamas is hiding underground. Therefore, we want everybody here, 1.2 million people, to move south. And if they don't, we will bombard them. And that's what they did. As you know, people were forced to move south and then further south and then further south. And right now they are mostly concentrated in Rafah, about 1.5 million people who are not only refugees, but also internal refugees. And Israel prevents them from going back up north. And Israel announces that we will not allow them to go back up north. And anybody who tries to go back up north are being bombed. And many Palestinians fear that the plan is to push them out into the Sinai, to force Egypt to sort of take them in on humanitarian grounds. Then they're not a problem anymore for Israel. They're a problem for the international community and not for Israel. But I want to go back to the central theme that we started with. Is violence the answer, or can there be non-violent solutions, or avenues, or methods of dealing with this situation? I strongly believe, and I have said this even before October 7, and I will say it again, that the two populations in Palestine, Israel today, the original Palestinian Arab population, and all the Jews who came from all over the world and who have settled and made Israel their home. These two populations need to find a new way of living together. The way of negating, totally delegitimizing, totally dominating and oppressing the other group has not succeeded and will not succeed. Now, that's quite a mouthful. Let me parse it out a little bit for you. And again, please, I am not implying at all that there is any symmetry or any equality between the two groups. I'm not saying they are both the same or have equal historical or religious or moral or existential claim to the land. I'm leaving that conversation aside for the moment, although I have a lot to say about it. I am saying the reality on the ground today is that this whole area, whether you call it Palestine or Israel or the Holy Land or whatever you want to call it, cannot be exclusively Jewish, as Jewish as France is French. That's what the Zionist goal was. And cannot either be an exclusively Arab land. So those who say Palestine Arabiya, yes, Palestine is Arab. But there's 7 million Jews living there, and they're going nowhere. They consider it their home. Rightly or wrongly, by whatever means they came to live there, they are living there, and they cannot be removed. They cannot. Among other things, they have nuclear weapons of interest, I think, to this particular group. They also have huge military industry. They're, I think, number 6 in the world in producing and exporting weapons. They have technological advances, particularly in the area of drones and smart bombs. And on top of it all, they have the uncritical, unquestioning support of the United States and many other Western powers. They are going nowhere. They are there. By the same token, the Palestinian people, with every possible disadvantage that you can imagine, who have been crushed, who have no air force, had a few gliders like with motorized bicycles and gliders, which they used actually in the assault on October 7th. They have no tanks. They certainly have no weapons industry other than very creatively taking unexploded weapons from Israel and literally forging them into explosives and IUDs and other weapons. They certainly have no lines of support from any neighboring, distant Arab or Muslim country. They have been fragmented by Israel into 5 different categories. There's the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, 2 million of them, that have very little, if any, political power in Israel. There are people in Jerusalem, where I come from, who are residents but not citizens. Then there are people in the West Bank, and if we go back to that other map, where, where they are also internally fragmented. You see the white areas here, which are areas A and B, and people cannot literally cannot move between and among these small areas without permission from the Israelis who control everything. And the Jewish settlements between and among them are expanding, and they move totally as if this is all part of Israel. Then there are people in Gaza, as I explained, who are under a stage of constant siege. And there are the Palestinian refugees who are outside. So the Palestinian population has been fragmented. Its leadership is between inefficient and totally betraying them, acting on behalf of the Israeli occupation. Their supposed friend in the Arab world, totally inept, totally unwilling, and incapable of even providing them just basic help. So when Palestinians feel that they are facing an actual genocide that is being broadcast in live 24 hours 7, that everybody can see on the screens every day, with Israeli leaders openly saying, we're going to cut off your water, we're going to cut off your food, we're going to cut off your medicine. One of the items that gets turned back from these aid convoys usually are anesthesia and anesthesia units for hospitals. So you have over 1,000 children have had one or two limbs, arms or legs amputated, sometimes without anesthesia. And the Arab world is incapable or unwilling to act on their behalf. These two groups, with total inequality of power between them, somehow need to find a way to live together. And violence is not the answer. October 7 has shown, at least Israelis, that with all the power in the world, you cannot obtain security. You will never be safe. You will never know where the next major surprise is going to come from. But there is a way to be safe, and that is by making peace, not by violence. I think that's my phone. It's in my right pocket. Sorry, I can quickly dismiss it. Okay. Thank you. Many people used to think that the two-state solution provided an answer. The two-state solution is based on the theory that this land, the West Bank, including Jerusalem, and Gaza, should be turned into a Palestinian state. And that a Jewish state can live side by a Palestinian state. And I must admit that I was one of those who accepted this grand compromise. Even though it wasn't very fair, it made some sense. And it had international legitimacy. Because in 1967, Israel claimed that we're not looking to take any property. This is just a preemptive defensive war. Yes, we hit them first, but it's because we thought they were going to hit us. So this was really a defensive war. We have no ambitions. We're not trying to take anything. So many people said, okay, you don't want to take anything, give it back and allow Palestinians to have a state next to Israel. And Palestinians were badgered and forced or convinced to accept this as a compromise. That, okay, even though we lost most of Palestine in 1948 during the Nakba, we can live with a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. And most of the rest of the world chimed in, that sounds very good idea. That's how we solve the problem. We do a two-state solution. The problem is that the Zionist movement and the state of Israel never really accepted that idea. They started taking up and building settlements all over, inside and around and between and among the area that was supposed to become a Palestinian state. Because ideologically, they believed that the land belongs to them and that it should be made as Jewish as France is French, whether it's because God gave it to them. It's really interesting because the Zionist movement is a secular movement. Ben Gurion used to say, I don't believe in God, but I believe he gave us this land. Or because Lord Balfour gave it to them at the time when Britain really ruled a lot of the world and they felt that they could give it to them. Whether they felt they needed it as compensation for what all these Christian Europeans did to them in Europe for years and years. For years and years, whether because they needed a place of refuge, whether they were powerful enough and they took it. It's like, I keep telling my Israeli friends, your biggest problem is that you're an anachronism. You're living in the 20th and 21st century when you can't just take land by force. You just can't. 2, 3, 4 centuries ago, that was fine. That's how countries were formed and expanded. And you capture and you annex property that's important to you. After World War II, that was no longer possible. You can't just take a country next to you. In fact, international law is built on this concept of the inviolability of states. There were actually only 4 or 5 cases since 1948. It's really something. There's 194 countries in the world. Most of them have some kind of disputes or claims or fights with their neighbors over water, over borders, over tribal lines, over security, over whatever. But they were all told, you cannot just go and take it. Very few exceptions. Iraq taking Kuwait, which used to be the 19th province of Iraq. They were told, no, you can't do that. Morocco taking Western Sahara, again, until President Trump came in and said, yeah, go ahead, take it. The rest of the world says you cannot do it. The Crimea and the Ukraine, where Russia tried to take countries that had a Russian population in them. And Israel, and Tibet and Israel. Five cases. Amazing. It's a hard bedrock of international policy that you can't just take countries by force. And whether it's defensive or offensive, who started and who didn't, you just can't do that. Now, I want to end by answering the question that we started with and then give you a chance to challenge me and to engage in me. I love speaking to an audience like this, where you know enough about international law and about world history. I don't have to spend half the time explaining to you what happened in 1948 and what happened in 1967. But to answer your question, is it possible for these two groups, these two communities, to live together in peace? I believe it is. I believe that we can come up with a solution that gives each population everything that it wants, except for exclusivity. Your state can be Jewish, but not exclusively Jewish, because half the people in it are not Jews anyway. Your state can be an Arab state, but it can't be exclusively Arab, because half the people living in it are not even Arab. But you can be fully Arab and fully Jewish, but not exclusively so. In that little book that I wrote, Beyond the Two-State Solution, and I would encourage you all to read it. It's a small book. You can download it for free in Arabic, English, or Hebrew, or Spanish. We still don't have a French version, unfortunately. But I tried to envision how such a state can work and how such a state can fulfill the needs, the basic desires of both people. Can give Jews everything that Zionism promised them, except for exclusivity. That can give Palestinian Arabs everything that Palestinian nationalism demands, except for exclusivity. That these two communities can, in fact, live together in peace, not through violence, not through imposing their will on each other, but in working for a new vision that addresses their needs regardless who has 51% and who has 49%. To overcome the demographic demon, to create a pluralistic society that is genuinely democratic, but which also respects the rights of the individual and the rights of the minority, and protects them against the next election who wins 51% of the vote. My time is running out, and I think I have presented some provocative ideas. Now, I acknowledge that like every vision, like every dream, it has some idealism built into it. But doesn't every dream or vision or ideology have some element of idealism, of aspiring towards something better than what exists? Because I'm telling you, what exists here is not good. Not good for the weak party, the Palestinians, not good for the strong party, the Israelis. The shock to their system of having a people that they had totally and completely dominated and managed to the point where they didn't even have to worry about them, where they can hold a music festival within 2 kilometers of their walls and just enjoy themselves as if 2.3 million people don't exist on the other side of the border. That was shattered on October 7th. And perhaps, I know somebody is going to quote me and make me look like a monster. Perhaps that was a good thing, that was shattered. That idea that through brute force alone, you can somehow dominate another people and not worry about them and live in peace. A peace that you force on them, that you shove down their throats, that you can keep them so tied up that there is nothing they can do. One Israeli general once said, what can they do? They're like cockroaches in a bottle, like drugged cockroaches in a bottle. And that was not just in dehumanizing them, which of course it was, but was also an expression of we have the power and they don't. We can do whatever we want, and there's nothing they can do about it, especially if we have the United States and Canada and a few other countries supporting us and allowing us to continue. That can no longer happen. We need a new vision. We need to think out of the box. And the horrors that are taking place today should convince everybody throughout the world that this cannot go on this way anymore. There has to be a reactivation of international law, a reactivation of universal respect for human rights, a reactivation of a vision of the world where everybody can enjoy life in dignity, in peace, and in equality, rather than the strong dominating and dictating on the poor. And with this, I will stop and invite your questions, both here or those who are watching us on Zoom, because I recognize that the ideas that I am offering are not what you usually hear in the media and from the pundits, but I think that we can really engage in some intelligent conversation.